Deep in the heart of the mountains, an old cabin stood alone, surrounded by the stillness of the wilderness. The night was cold, and the silver light of the moon bathed the rugged landscape in an eerie glow. Inside the cabin, the silence was shattered by an unfamiliar sound, a faint, chilling cry that carried on the wind. It was unmistakably the wail of a baby. The man inside, muscular and scarred from a life of hard labor, froze as the sound reached his ears. Shirtless and gripping an axe, he moved cautiously to the doorway, his sharp eyes scanning the dark expanse beyond. He had always been attuned to the slightest noise in these mountains, but this was unlike anything he had heard before. The idea of a baby crying in such a desolate place seemed absurd. Perhaps a rat had snuck into the cabin, he thought, dismissing the idea with a shake of his head. Still, his instincts warned him to remain alert. If anyone had managed to dodge the traps that protected his home, they were no ordinary trespasser. Tension coiled in his muscles as he stepped into the stable, his axe raised high, ready to strike. His heart pounded as he swung with precision, expecting to confront a shadowy figure. But the blade met only air. The stable was empty, save for the usual clutter of hay and tools. He lowered the axe, confusion etched on his face. The phantom cries of a child still echoed faintly in his ears, dredging up old wounds. He had been told he could never father a child, and since then, these strange sounds had haunted him, a cruel reminder of what he could never have. Turning to leave, something caught his eye. There, lying on the ground amidst the hay, was a small bundle wrapped in white cloth. He approached cautiously, his breath catching in his throat as he knelt to inspect it. Peeling back the edges of the fabric, he found a baby, a pale, blonde-haired infant with delicate features, its tiny chest rising and falling with life. Disbelief flooded his mind as he gingerly picked up the child, pressing it to his ear. A soft, rhythmic thumping greeted him, confirming the impossible: the baby was alive. He stood there, frozen, a mixture of awe and confusion washing over him. Before he could process what he was holding, the soft creak of footsteps startled him. His wife, Alina, appeared in the doorway, her face marked with concern. She must have heard the commotion and come to investigate. Her eyes widened as they locked onto the baby cradled in his arms. The shock was evident as she took a hesitant step forward, her gaze darting between her husband and the infant. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with disbelief and unspoken questions. Alina's voice finally broke the silence, her tone trembling with confusion and alarm. She demanded an explanation, her expression a mixture of fear and wonder. But the man could only stammer, his mind still reeling from the surreal scene. Deep down, a conviction began to grow within him, overpowering his rational thoughts. Despite the impossibility of it all, he felt an unshakable connection to the child in his arms. His voice, steadying, carried the weight of his realization as he turned to face Alina. This child, they claimed, against all odds, was theirs. Shiren sat immersed in the pages of a book, his mind wandering into the tales of a mystical figure whose magical abilities transformed the lives of villagers. The figure could summon rain to quench parched lands, shield the people from danger, and bring peace to a once hungry village. The vivid descriptions filled Shiren with wonder, planting a deep longing to understand the mysterious power that others called magic. His thoughts were interrupted when his father, Vincent, appeared, his powerful frame casting a shadow over the boy. Vincent, with his rugged features and playful demeanor, scooped Shiren up, spinning him around. The boy's laughter filled the air, momentarily erasing the doubts that had begun to creep into Vincent's heart about whether he was doing enough as a father. The bond between father and son was strong, though Vincent couldn't ignore the whispers that followed them. In the village, children gossiped about Shiren's unusual habits, his endless fascination with books, and his scrawny build that contrasted sharply with Vincent's towering, muscular figure. Some even suggested that Shiren wasn't truly Vincent's son, claiming he had been abandoned and taken in. Vincent's jaw clenched as he overheard their cruel words, his protective instincts flaring. He wanted to shield Shiren from the harshness of the world, but he knew the boy had to grow strong on his own. To distract him, Vincent suggested a trip to the nearby city of Kriz, a place bustling with life, where Shiren could lose himself in the vibrant energy and forget the hurtful remarks. The journey to Kriz was filled with Shiren's excited chatter as the buggy rolled along the dusty road. The boy's eyes lit up as they entered the city, taking in the crowded streets, colorful market stalls, and the aroma of fresh bread wafting from bakeries. Vincent smiled at his son's enthusiasm but reminded him to stay at Martin's grandfather's store while he ran errands. Shiren promised to be careful, his curiosity barely contained as Vincent rode off into the crowd. At the store, Shiren impressed the old man with his quick learning and eagerness to help, writing neat labels on slates and organizing the shop's goods. Yet his thoughts remained consumed by the idea of magic, and he couldn't resist asking the old man if he knew anything about it. The grandfather chuckled, admitting he had little knowledge but pointing Shiren toward a nearby bookstore. The boy's heart raced as he ran toward it, but his excitement was quickly crushed when the storekeeper scolded him, accusing him of being unworthy to touch the expensive volumes. Humiliated, Shiren left the shop, wandering aimlessly through the streets until he stumbled upon a man discarding old books into a pile of garbage. Shocked, Shiren realized these were the kinds of books his father had given him. Though worn and tattered, they contained knowledge that fueled his dreams. Picking one up, he felt a surge of gratitude for Vincent's quiet sacrifices. As Shiren clutched the book, he noticed two noblewomen passing by, their elegant clothes and pristine books a stark contrast to his dirty appearance. A pang of envy pierced him as he wondered why the world treated them so differently. Before he could dwell on the thought, a guard spotted him and grabbed his shoulder. Shiren panicked as the guard questioned his presence, suspecting him to be an orphan or a thief. Thinking quickly, Shiren wriggled free, leaving his jacket behind as he darted into the alleyways. Panting heavily, he hid behind a bush, waiting for the guards to move on. His clothes were now dirtier, his hair tangled with leaves, but his determination remained unshaken. Wandering further, Shiren found himself near a tall wall enclosing a beautiful garden. From the other side, he heard an elderly voice discussing magic. Peeking through the gaps, he saw children gathered around a wise-looking man, the headmaster of what seemed to be a magic academy. The headmaster spoke of insight as the key to understanding magic, a concept that intrigued Shiren. The children's questions and the headmaster's answers filled him with an intense yearning to belong to this world. Yet, Shiren hesitated, knowing he was a mess, his clothes torn, his face smudged, and his hair wild. Still, the pull was irresistible. He felt an undeniable urge to climb the wall, his heart pounding with both fear and excitement. Summoning his courage, Shiren hoisted himself up and looked over the edge. The sight took his breath away. A serene garden filled with vibrant flowers and a massive tree under which the headmaster sat with the children. It was a scene of tranquility and wonder, a world Shiren had only imagined in his books. Gulping down his fears, he jumped into the garden, his landing messy but resolute. The headmaster turned to him, his wise eyes twinkling with curiosity. Despite his disheveled appearance, Shiren stood tall, his determination outweighing his fear. This was his chance, a moment that would shape his future. As he met the headmaster's gaze, Shiren felt a spark ignite within him, a glimmer of hope that perhaps, in this magical world, he might finally find where he belonged. Shiren cautiously approached the group of children and the elderly headmaster, his heart racing with both anticipation and fear. The children immediately began to murmur among themselves, their disdain clear. They whispered loudly about his appearance, calling him a commoner, and questioning his right to be there. Shiren froze momentarily, unsure whether to proceed, but the headmaster's warm and inviting demeanor eased his nerves. The old man gestured for Shiren to come closer, his curious eyes twinkling with intrigue. Shiren hesitated before haltingly admitting that he had come to witness magic, something he had read about but never seen with his own eyes. His earnestness caught the headmaster's attention, but the children's skepticism grew louder. They mocked him, doubting his claim of being able to read books, yet Shiren remained steadfast in his request. The headmaster, amused by Shiren's persistence, decided to indulge him with a simple spell. With a wave of his hand, the headmaster summoned a gust of wind that lifted everyone into the air. The children squealed with delight, their laughter filling the air as they floated and spun weightlessly. Shiren, on the other hand, struggled to stay balanced, fear gripping him as he flailed in the air. Eventually, the spell subsided, and everyone gently descended back to the ground. Shiren stood in awe, his mind racing with questions about what he had just experienced. The headmaster explained that what Shiren had witnessed was magic, describing it as an act that defied common sense, and explored the truths hidden in the irrational. While the explanation intrigued Shiren, it also left him yearning for more clarity. As the headmaster elaborated on the nature of magic, he introduced the concept of the spirit zone, a state of heightened mental sensitivity that allowed magicians to perceive and manipulate the world around them. To demonstrate, he called upon one of the students, a girl named Shuaman, to enter the spirit zone. She obeyed, focusing intently, and accurately guessed the number of coins in the headmaster's closed hand. Shiren watched, astonished, as the headmaster explained that this heightened awareness was not about physical counting but about sensing the entirety of a situation in a supernatural capacity. The ability to enter this state, the headmaster explained, was essential for a magician to dominate reality. The demonstration set Shiren's mind ablaze with possibilities. He pondered the idea of magic as something beyond the boundaries of conventional understanding, drawing parallels to the stories of great thinkers who were once dismissed for their irrational ideas. Despite his humble origins and lack of formal training, Shiren's thoughts revealed a depth of insight that surprised even the headmaster. Determined to learn magic, Shiren boldly asked what he needed to do to master it. The headmaster, both impressed and hesitant, decided to challenge him. He invited Shiren to attempt entering the spirit zone himself, knowing full well that such a feat was beyond most beginners. Shiren closed his eyes, focusing inward as he tried to sense himself, as instructed by the headmaster. He delved into the depths of his mind, questioning the nature of his own existence. He wrestled with abstract concepts, attempting to strip away his physical and mental constructs to reach a purer state of sensitivity. Time seemed to stretch as he navigated this mental exercise, trying to quiet his thoughts and erase his presence. When he finally opened his eyes, his face was wet with tears. He described hearing all the sounds around him with an intensity he had never experienced before. The other children laughed, dismissing his efforts as trivial, while the headmaster observed silently, masking his disappointment. Entering the spirit zone required more than just effort. It demanded an innate talent and years of disciplined practice. Despite Shiren's apparent failure, the headmaster encouraged him to continue practicing, offering him a glimmer of hope for the future. As the lesson ended and the students followed the headmaster back to the school building, Shiren was left standing alone. The headmaster glanced back, his thoughts heavy with regret. He recognized Shiren's potential but knew that his lack of noble birth and early training placed him at a disadvantage. With a heavy heart, he dismissed the boy's talent as another untapped brilliance that would likely fade into obscurity. Shiren, however, was undeterred. Climbing back over the wall, he landed on the other side, panting heavily. A sense of triumph filled him as he whispered to himself, overwhelmed by the realization that the exercise had, in some small way, worked. Though the journey ahead was daunting, Shiren's resolve only deepened. He had glimpsed the world of magic, and nothing would stop him from pursuing its mysteries. Shiren experienced an overwhelming burst of sound that left him disoriented and unsure of his surroundings. The experience of the spirit zone left him in awe and confusion, as he felt like he was scattered across the world, an infinite presence beyond his physical form. For a fleeting moment, he believed he had become one with the world itself. The sensation of vastness and immensity coursed through him, leaving him exhilarated but also profoundly unsettled. As he sprinted through the streets in a daze, he couldn't contain his awe at the realization of what had just occurred. Lost in thought, he collided with a man, who immediately reacted with anger. Shiren tried to apologize, but the man's fury only escalated, accusing him of malicious intent. The situation spiraled as the man, joined by others, started threatening Shiren, dragging him into their frustrations. Shiren tried to clarify that it was an accident, but his words were drowned out by the man's accusations. The tension grew, and before Shiren could react, he was struck in the stomach, collapsing to the ground. The insults became crueler, targeting not only him but his family. Shiren's despair deepened as they beat him relentlessly, mocking his helplessness. Despite his attempts to protect himself, he was overwhelmed by the men's aggression. Their taunts echoed in his mind, and his body throbbed with pain. Just as the violence reached a fever pitch, a noble girl with striking crimson hair appeared. Amy, a young noble from the powerful house of Karmis, casually approached the scene. The men immediately deferred to her, their demeanor shifting from hostility to exaggerated politeness. Amy, amused by the situation, decided to intervene, though her motives seemed more driven by curiosity than concern. Her commanding presence gave Shiren a momentary reprieve, though her remarks only added to his humiliation. The men, emboldened by her apparent indifference, suggested even more degrading ways to deal with Shiren, reducing him to an object of ridicule. Amy's playful tone belied a calculating mind, and though she seemed willing to let the matter rest, the men pressed on, escalating their threats. Amid the chaos, Shiren's awareness began to shift. His heightened senses returned, transporting him back to the state he experienced in the spirit zone. The sounds around him became vivid, each noise sharp and distinct, weaving a tapestry of perception. The buzzing of bees, the fluttering of birds' wings, even the faint squeaking of rats in the distance, all became part of his awareness. As the men's aggression intensified, something within Shiren snapped. In an instant, a powerful surge of wind erupted around him, sending the men flying like leaves caught in a cyclone. The violent force left them scattered, injured, and groaning in pain. Shiren stood in stunned disbelief at what he had just done, the realization of his newfound power dawning on him. Amy, too, was taken aback, though her shock quickly turned to intrigue. She demanded answers, questioning how a commoner like Cheyenne could wield magic. Her disbelief mirrored the impossibility of what had just occurred. Before she could press further, the sound of approaching voices interrupted the moment, and Amy swiftly vanished, leaping onto a nearby building with an agility that left Cheyenne awestruck. Her departure was as swift and enigmatic as her arrival, leaving Cheyenne alone amidst the wreckage of his actions. The battered men around him groaned in pain, their injuries severe enough to ensure that no one would listen to Cheyenne's side of the story. Realizing the danger he was in, Cheyenne fled, his thoughts racing as he struggled to comprehend the magnitude of what had happened. The events weighed heavily on him as he ran through the streets, tears streaming down his face. His mind replayed the insults, the violence, and the overwhelming sense of power that had erupted from within him. He thought of his parents, their love and sacrifices, and the harsh reality of the world he lived in. The bitterness of his circumstances deepened as he faced the cold, unforgiving nature of life. Cheyenne's despair mingled with a newfound determination, a spark ignited by his brief glimpse into the realm of magic. Meanwhile, at the grand estate of the Carmy's family, Amy returned, her mind preoccupied with the day's events. The estate, nestled among majestic mountains and surrounded by lush gardens, seemed an oasis of tranquility compared to the chaos she had just left behind. Inside, her father, Carmy Shakura, noticed her early return and commented on her frequent absences from lessons. Amy, usually quick to retort, remained uncharacteristically quiet. Her thoughts lingered on Cheyenne and the inexplicable display of magic she had witnessed. As Carmy observed his daughter's unusual demeanor, she shifted the conversation toward magic, probing him for connections to those who might understand its mysteries. Though her inquiry seemed casual, the weight of what she had seen suggested otherwise. In her heart, she knew Cheyenne's display of power was far from ordinary, and her curiosity about him had only just begun. The snow fell in thick, relentless layers, shrouding the forest in a cold, muffled silence as Vincent trudged through the knee-deep drifts. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighed down by the icy air, and the knot of fear tightening in his chest. Cheyenne had gone into the woods, venturing to the logging area to gather firewood despite the snowstorm. The thought of his son out there, alone and exposed to the dangers of the wilderness, sent shivers down Vincent's spine that had little to do with the cold. He could still hear Alina's words from earlier ringing in his ears. Cheyenne went to the logging area to get some wood. Vincent cursed under his breath. What could the boy have been thinking? As the snow continued to fall, a new layer of dread settled over him. Cheyenne was capable and hardworking, but this was no ordinary task. This was a test of survival against nature's relentless fury. The storm brought back haunting memories. Vincent's mind flashed to a spring day years ago, the day he first brought Cheyenne to the city. The boy's wide-eyed wonder at the bustling streets and towering buildings had been short-lived. That same day, Cheyenne had wandered off and gotten lost. Though he was eventually found, shaken but unharmed, the incident had left Vincent with an unease that never truly faded. Cheyenne had explained little about what happened, and Vincent had always felt that the boy was holding something back. Now, as he searched the snow-covered wilderness, those same fears clawed at him. What if this time he couldn't bring his son back? What if Cheyenne was lost to him forever? For Cheyenne, the events of that spring day had remained a puzzle, locked away in the deepest recesses of his mind. Something extraordinary had occurred, something beyond his understanding. He had cast magic without meaning to, without even knowing how. The power had been immense, but it had come and gone in an instant, leaving behind nothing but questions. Since that day, he had tried countless times to summon it again, but the magic eluded him. It was as though the event existed on the edge of memory, blurred and incomplete, with crucial pieces missing. It was both a tantalizing mystery and a constant reminder of his limitations. Even as he grew older and took on the work of a woodsman, the memory lingered, urging him to seek answers he couldn't yet comprehend. When Vincent finally caught sight of Cheyenne, the relief was fleeting, quickly replaced by awe and bewilderment. From a distance, he watched as his son stood amidst the towering trees, wielding his axe with uncanny precision. With a single strike, Cheyenne felled a tree, the sound echoing through the forest like a clap of thunder. Vincent recognized the technique, Thunder Strike, a rare and difficult skill that targeted a tree's weakest point, bringing it down with minimal effort. It was a feat many woodsmen spent their lives trying to master, yet Cheyenne had achieved it with an ease that seemed almost unnatural. Vincent felt a swell of pride but also a deep unease. There was something extraordinary about Cheyenne, something that set him apart. The forest seemed to respond to him as if he were part of it, as if he were attuned to its every movement. Cheyenne, oblivious to his father's presence, continued his work, his thoughts drifting to the spirit zone, a realm he could access only in moments of deep connection with nature. Within this ethereal space, he could feel the pulse of life around him. The trees, the earth, even the smallest creatures beneath the soil. It was as though he were a part of everything, and everything was a part of him. The experience was overwhelming yet profoundly beautiful. Hours passed in this meditative state, but for Cheyenne, time seemed irrelevant. Even as the cold began to seep into his bones, he was reluctant to leave the tranquility of the forest. Eventually, burdened with firewood, he made his way home, his mind still preoccupied with the mysteries of his connection to the natural world. As Cheyenne approached the small, snow-covered house, he was struck by an unusual sight. Outside stood a luxurious carriage, its sleek, polished frame glinting faintly in the fading light. The 2 white horses that pulled it were pristine, their coats unblemished by mud or snow. Cheyenne's brows furrowed in confusion. Visitors were rare in this remote part of the kingdom, and such an opulent carriage was even rarer. He pushed open the door, announcing his return, but the scene inside only deepened his unease. His parents sat stiffly at the table, their faces drawn with worry, and across from them sat a stranger. The man was elegantly dressed, with an air of authority that bordered on arrogance. A monocle glinted in the firelight as he turned to regard Cheyenne with an appraising gaze. The man introduced himself as Timurin, the assistant butler of the House of Ojent, a noble family of considerable influence. Timurin wasted no time in explaining his purpose. He had come for Cheyenne, not for his physical strength but for his intellect, specifically, his ability to read. The House of Ojent required someone to help catalog and sort their extensive library, a collection of nearly 10,000 books. The task was immense, spanning 2 years, and fraught with danger. Timurin made it clear that discretion was paramount. Should even a single book go missing, or should word of the project leak to outsiders, the consequences would be dire. Cheyenne's family would pay the ultimate price. Vincent's hands clenched into fists as he listened. The promise of wealth meant little to him. What mattered was the opportunity for Cheyenne to pursue his dreams. He had always believed in his son's potential, in his ability to rise above the humble life of a woodsman. Yet now, faced with the reality of Timurin's proposal, Vincent was torn. The risks were staggering, and the condescending tone of the butler only added to his growing frustration. Timurin dismissed Vincent's hopes for Cheyenne as naive, belittling his aspirations with cruel, calculated words. The accusations stung, but they also stirred something fierce within Vincent. He remembered the moment he had first realized Cheyenne's brilliance, the way the boy had taught himself to read, driven by an insatiable curiosity. Vincent had once begged for an opportunity like this, kneeling before the nobles and pleading for Cheyenne to be given a chance. But now, seeing the fear in his wife's eyes and the weight of the decision pressing down on his son, he questioned whether he had made the right choice. Cheyenne stood silently, his mind racing. The mention of the library filled him with a strange excitement. The chance to access such a wealth of knowledge was beyond anything he had ever imagined. Yet the stakes were impossibly high. He glanced at his parents, seeing the conflict etched into their faces, and felt a surge of guilt. This wasn't just his decision to make, the consequences would affect them all. Vincent's voice broke the tense silence, filled with raw emotion as he demanded that Timurin leave. His son's dreams were worth more than any amount of money, more than any promise of opportunity. For all his doubts and regrets, Vincent knew one thing for certain: Cheyenne was his son, and no ambition, no matter how grand, was worth risking the bond that held their family together. Vincent's anger boiled over as he demanded Timurin leave, his voice echoing through the small house. He couldn't bear the disdainful mockery aimed at his family for their modest means. Timurin, though outwardly composed, left with an air of annoyance, inwardly grumbling about people who didn't know their place. But as he departed, Cheyenne's calm, resolute voice cut through the tension. To the shock of his parents, Cheyenne declared that he would take on the task. His decision was not made lightly, and his determination was evident as he assured Timurin of his unwavering commitment to the conditions. Though the butler emphasized the life-threatening risks of the role, Cheyenne remained resolute, even promising not to hold any resentment should things go awry. Vincent's heart was heavy as he tried to dissuade Cheyenne, insisting that the opportunity wasn't worth the danger. He blamed himself for even entertaining the notion, but Cheyenne's calm demeanor and heartfelt gratitude left him speechless. Cheyenne saw the offer not as a burden but as a gift, an unprecedented chance to elevate himself and his family. Overcome with emotion, Vincent embraced his son, vowing to protect him no matter what and promising that their family would endure whatever consequences came their way. Alina, silently observing from a distance, wiped her tears, pride mingling with worry as she reflected on how far Cheyenne had come. The family's bonds felt unshakable, but the looming sense of uncertainty was palpable. A week passed, and the Ogent family's butlers arrived to take Sirone away. The formalities of signing papers brought a stark sense of finality to the moment, leaving Vincent momentarily frozen as the weight of the decision fully settled on him. With time slipping away, Sirone said his goodbyes, his resolve unwavering as he prepared to leave the life he knew behind. As the carriage departed, he glanced back at his weeping parents, promising himself that he would seize this once-in-a-lifetime chance. He knew the path ahead was fraught with peril, but the opportunity was too extraordinary to pass up. The risks, though daunting, seemed a fair trade for the potential to achieve his dreams. The journey to the Ogent family estate was both enlightening and intimidating. One of the butlers shared insights about the family's history and influence within the kingdom of Thormia. The Ogents, a warrior family of great renown, were steeped in power, their lineage marked by legendary swordsmen and knights. The sprawling estate loomed in the distance, its grandeur and imposing architecture a testament to their status. Sirone's awe was tinged with apprehension as the butlers warned him of the family's strict hierarchy and fearsome reputation. The imposing great walkway leading to the mansion seemed almost surreal, a physical manifestation of the immense power that awaited him within. Upon arrival, Sirone was shown his quarters in the butler's tower, a modest but functional lodging that would serve as both his home and workplace for the next 2 years. Sirone greeted him with curt professionalism, outlining his responsibilities. The task ahead was daunting. He would organize the family's massive library, sorting tens of thousands of books according to a precise system. Sirone quickly realized the enormity of the challenge, understanding why a single individual was entrusted with the job. Consistency in classification was paramount, and any misstep could disrupt the intricate web of knowledge contained within the collection. Despite the restrictions placed on his movements and the gravity of the assignment, Sirone's eagerness to begin was unwavering. The next day, Sirone donned his butler uniform and started working. The library was vast, a labyrinth of shelves filled with books spanning every conceivable subject. As he delved into the task, he discovered the interconnectedness of knowledge, with history serving as its backbone. The realization was profound. History not only provided context, but also accelerated learning in other fields. Among the collection, nearly 850 volumes were dedicated to history, and Sirone resolved to read them all during his time at the estate. His ultimate goal of becoming a mage felt closer with each piece of knowledge he acquired, though he knew the road ahead would be grueling. Sirone worked tirelessly, often staying late to read and study. However, the restrictions weighed on him, and he had to be cautious not to be caught reading during off hours. Sirone noticed Sirone's diligence and warned him to pace himself, emphasizing the heavy responsibility of his role. Sirone, though grateful for the advice, knew he couldn't afford to slow down. Every moment counted in his pursuit of excellence, and he vowed to avoid any mistakes that might jeopardize his position. The weight of the Ogent family's reputation and expectations loomed over him, but he remained steadfast in his commitment. As the weeks passed, Sirone's work revealed the depth and complexity of the library's contents. The kingdom of Thormia's intricate history alone was a monumental undertaking, let alone the histories of neighboring realms. Sirone wrestled with the enormity of the task, questioning his ability to grasp and retain so much information. Yet, he knew that true mastery required not just memorization but a deep understanding of every event and its implications. Exhaustion often overtook him, and on more than one occasion, he fell asleep at his desk, his head resting on an open book. Sirone, observing Sirone's efforts, dismissed his aspirations with a mix of amusement and disdain. To him, Sirone's dedication seemed naive, an idealistic dream that lacked practical grounding. Yet Sirone remained undeterred. He knew the odds were against him, but he also believed that this opportunity was his to shape. The path he had chosen was treacherous, but his resolve to navigate it was unyielding. Every book, every sleepless night, and every challenge was a step toward the future he envisioned. For Sirone, the Ogent estate was not just a workplace, it was a crucible, a place where his determination and dreams would be tested to their limits. 3 months had passed since Sirone began working in the great library of the House of Ogent. Gradually, he grew accustomed to the routine of classifying books, a task that, while monotonous, allowed him to observe and absorb snippets of information from the servants around him. The butlers often borrowed books, and Sirone quickly learned that the nobles they served paid little attention to the condition or return of the borrowed materials. This lack of concern baffled Sirone, especially given the lengths to which the servants went to maintain order. The aristocrats' apathy extended even to the potential loss of books, but for the butlers, such oversights could result in blame or reprimand. The contrast between the noble's nonchalance and the servant's fear-driven diligence highlighted the precariousness of life as a commoner. Sirone, recalling warnings from others about the harsh consequences of mistakes, resolved to lead a quiet and unobtrusive existence, avoiding unnecessary risks. One day, his routine was interrupted by the loud bang of the library doors as Ryan Ogent, the youngest son of the Lord, stormed in, venting his frustration about being forced to train on a day he wished to rest. Sirone recognized Ryan by his distinctive blue hair and observed as the boy attempted to hide from his furious instructor. The instructor, a formidable man with a long beard, soon followed, demanding to know where Ryan was hiding. Sirone, knowing better than to defy someone with such authority, reluctantly revealed Ryan's location, leading to the boy being dragged away for a grueling punishment. Sirone later learned through rumors that Ryan was taken to the mountains for a month of relentless training, a fate he did not envy. As time passed, Sirone immersed himself in reading and analyzing the library's vast collection. Initially, completing even a single book took him considerable effort, but with persistence, he managed to finish 82 books within 4 months. The beginning had been the hardest, but with each book, he found the material easier to comprehend. His strategy was clear. If he could establish a solid foundation by understanding the first 200 books, the remaining volumes would become more manageable. History, while initially seeming like an unconventional choice, soon proved to be a valuable subject. Through the study of historical mages and their accomplishments, Sirone realized that the disciplines of magic and scholarship were deeply intertwined. Mages, unlike ordinary scholars, possessed the unique ability to enter the spirit zone, a heightened state of mind that allowed them to manifest theoretical knowledge into reality. Sirone became convinced that combining the spirit zone with a robust foundation of knowledge could pave his way to becoming a true mage. However, just as he began to feel a sense of purpose, Ryan returned, bursting through the library doors with renewed fury. After enduring a month of grueling punishment, the boy's anger had not subsided. He confronted Sirone, accusing him of betrayal and cowardice for revealing his hiding place. Ryan's frustration stemmed from a perceived breach of trust, as he believed Sirone should have refused to comply with the instructor rather than selling him out. Despite Shire's calm explanations and logical reasoning, Ryan was determined to settle the matter his way. He led Sirone to the training grounds, declaring a duel to restore his pride. Sirone reluctantly followed, understanding the stakes. To defy Ryan would only worsen his situation. Ryan tossed him a wooden sword and announced the terms of the duel, offering Sirone 3 free strikes before retaliating. Though inexperienced in swordsmanship, Sirone decided to face the challenge, knowing that failure or hesitation could jeopardize the chance his parents had risked their lives to give him. His first 2 strikes were easily countered by Ryan, who mocked his lack of skill. With only 1 chance remaining, Sirone gathered all his focus, entering the spirit zone as he prepared his final attack. This heightened state sharpened his awareness, allowing him to deliver an unorthodox strike. To Ryan's astonishment, the blow shattered his sword into countless pieces, leaving him speechless. Sirone, though exhausted, had demonstrated the untapped potential within him, a glimpse of what he might one day achieve through perseverance and the spirit zone. Ryan's sword shattered, leaving him standing in stunned silence as he looked at Sirone, his mouth agape with disbelief. Sirone, on the other hand, felt a surge of triumph within him. He had gambled everything on this strike and it had paid off. The first strike had allowed him to gauge his opponent's movements, the second had let him calculate Ryan's timing, and with the third, he unleashed the Thunder Strike, a technique he had spent 3 years perfecting. As he watched Ryan, still reeling from the shock, Sirone felt a sense of validation. This wasn't swordsmanship as Ryan knew it, it was something completely different, a skill born from necessity. Shire's father had worked in the mountains as a lumberjack, and though Shire's own physique wasn't suited to the demanding work of chopping down trees, he had adapted by learning the Thunder Strike. The technique had been passed down among the lumberjacks, a method to supplement physical limitations with extraordinary power. However, Ryan was unable to accept this explanation. To him, a technique of such strength could only have been forged through years of formal training, not through manual labor. He had dedicated 15 years to mastering the sword and could not fathom how someone could learn such a technique while performing mundane tasks. His mind flashed to his older brother, Rai, who had been lauded for his sword skills and genius, earning praise from their master and their father. As the second son, Ryan had always lived in Rai's shadow, constantly striving to live up to the impossible standards set by his family. Despite his best efforts, Ryan had never been able to surpass his brother's skills, and it was a bitter truth he struggled to accept. With his sword broken and tears welling in his eyes, Ryan couldn't help but question why he couldn't catch up to Rai, a question that had plagued him for years. Sirone, seeing the turmoil in Ryan's expression, worried that he had pushed the young master too far. But Ryan's response was a sharp command, barking at Sirone to shut up and throwing him another sword, challenging him to a real duel. Ryan demanded that they have a rematch with real swords in a month's time, convinced that Sirone, who had learned the thunder strike, should be able to keep up. Sirone, terrified by the prospect of fighting with real weapons, tried to back out, but Ryan refused to hear any objections. Determined to prove his superiority, Sirone realized that his understanding of the Ogent family's complicated dynamics was crucial to navigating this challenge. The Ogent family, led by their father Biskov, had long been a house of distinction, with black and blue hair passing down through the generations as a sign of different talents. Ryan's elder brother Rai, with his black hair and extraordinary intellect, was a certified grade 6 swordsman, while Rai's younger sister, the blue-haired daughter, had chosen music over swordsmanship, finding her own path as a palace pianist. Ryan, however, had never been able to find his own place, despite the family's best efforts to foster his skills, including hiring expert teachers. He had been evaluated as lacking any significant talent. The entire mansion knew of his struggles. Sirone felt the weight of his actions, regretting having pushed Ryan's pride so far. He had never intended to hurt him, but now he realized that challenging someone with such a deep-seated complex of self-worth could lead to disastrous consequences. Sirone's mind wandered to the idea of survival, recognizing that he might not have the luxury of running away. His thoughts drifted to his own dreams. He had long abandoned the idea of swordsmanship in favor of becoming a mage, where his experiences in the mountains might prove useful in mastering some form of defensive magic. But Sirone also realized that time was running out for him to prepare for Ryan's challenge. Ryan, meanwhile, began training with newfound determination, pushing his body to the limits as he sought to break his records. His master, impressed by the sudden intensity of Ryan's training, could only speculate on what had caused the shift in his attitude. The master suspected that it was Rai's recent achievements that had once again driven Ryan to push himself beyond his normal limits. But Ryan's relentless training did not come without cost. As his body began to show signs of strain, his master warned him that he was going too far, but Ryan ignored the warnings, eager to prove that he was capable of overcoming his limits. Frustration built within him, especially as he continued to struggle with the concept of the schema, a physical and mental understanding of one's form. It was a technique that mages used in their own way through their spirit zone. But for swordsmen, it was an intimate knowledge of their own body that allowed them to control and influence even the smallest movements of their cells. Ryan couldn't grasp the concept, unable to connect with his body on such a deep level. Sirone, who had been quietly reflecting on his own journey, considered the possibility of using the schema to enhance his own training. He thought back to a girl he had met 3 years ago, who seemed to possess the same ability to control her body through schema. He realized that if he could tap into this power, he might be able to defend himself against Ryan's relentless pursuit. But Sirone knew that learning this technique wasn't going to be easy. It would require him to delve deeper into his own existence, something that was both difficult and inefficient. Despite this, he pressed forward, using his foundation in the spirit zone as a stepping stone to learning the art of swordsmanship. As he began to practice, striking in 8 different directions, he could feel the difference. It wasn't just about power or precision, but about control. He continued his practice, his breath steady and deliberate, as the weight of the upcoming duel with Ryan loomed large in his mind. Meanwhile, Ryan continued his brutal training, determined to break through his limitations. His arms ached with every strike, but he refused to stop. The master, concerned by Ryan's unrelenting persistence, tried to intervene, fearing that Ryan was pushing himself too far. Yet Ryan, with tears streaming down his face, yelled out in frustration, questioning why he couldn't seem to master the schema. His master, finally stopping him for the day, advised him to reconsider his approach, asking Ryan what he was truly good at. Ryan, ever the stubborn student, responded that he wasn't good at anything. But the master, with a knowing look, explained that the true mark of a genius wasn't just in their talent, but in their awareness of their own strengths. A genius understood what they were good at and honed those skills, while also recognizing their weaknesses. The master warned Ryan that the hardest thing for a genius to face was the fear of failure, the fear of working relentlessly at something they might never be able to achieve. Ryan, finally beginning to understand his master's words, swore to himself that he would push beyond his limits and overcome his rival, Sirone, no matter the cost. It was the only path left for him to prove his worth. Ryan's thoughts raced, swirling with intense determination and unshakable resolve. He had always believed that if one did not possess natural talent, they could compensate with sheer effort. His mind was consumed with the idea of proving that effort could outshine raw talent, a belief that had sustained him through countless hours of training and personal struggle. It was not just about winning. It was about proving to himself that he could surpass the limits imposed by his own inadequacies. The concept of a genius's natural enemy had never resonated more strongly within him. As Ryan readied himself for the duel, he felt the weight of this philosophy. He swore silently that no matter the odds, no matter the strength of his opponent, he would win. He had to. This was his moment to show that even the greatest of talents could be eclipsed by the relentless persistence of a determined soul. Meanwhile, Sirone grappled with his own internal struggles as he sought to understand the true nature of swordsmanship. To him, it was not simply a set of movements or an exercise of strength. It was a dynamic force, a deadly dance with the singular goal of eliminating life. But within this deadly art was something more, something that eluded many warriors, the psychological warfare that existed between the sword and its wielder. Sirone reflected on the teachings he had internalized over the past month, the lessons about the nature of sword fighting that transcended physical strikes. He had learned that, though an opponent might seem capable of attacking in countless ways, in reality, there were only 8 primary directions in which an attack could come. It was a seemingly simple concept, but it was revolutionary in its implications. To prepare himself for the inevitable battle, Sirone dedicated himself tirelessly to mastering these 8 directions, to anticipate and block each potential strike before it could even reach him. Each time he took a hit, he learned, adjusted, and moved on. There was no time to dwell on failure, only room for improvement. As Sirone stood in the training ground, dimly lit by flickering torches, he couldn't help but laugh. Swordsmanship, in all its complexities, seemed almost like magic to him. It was a world of infinite possibilities, just as magic could defy the known laws of the universe. Sirone's thoughts turned briefly to his parents. The weight of his decision to pursue this dangerous path weighed on him. He could feel the guilt gnawing at him, but he quickly pushed it aside. There were no regrets. The crossroads of life and death lay ahead. But with every swing of the sword, Sirone felt himself moving closer to something beyond his understanding, something greater than fear itself. Ryan and Sirone stood face to face, the air between them thick with tension. The torchlight cast long shadows on the ground, their silhouettes elongated and distorted as they prepared to clash. Ryan, full of curiosity, studied Sirone intently. He wondered whether, after only a month of training, Sirone could exude the presence of a true swordsman. The memory of their first meeting surfaced in his mind. Sirone had been clumsy, out of balance, and completely unrefined in his technique. But now, as Ryan looked at him, Sirone held himself with an eerie calm, his grip firm around the sword as if he had held it for years. There was no hesitation in his eyes, no uncertainty in his stance. He was different. Ryan couldn't help but feel a slight unease, but he quickly buried the feeling. He had his own reasons for being here, reasons that went beyond mere competition. If Sirone was truly as talented as Ryan feared, then he would have to fight harder than ever before to secure victory. Without warning, Ryan charged forward with a battle cry, determined to take the first strike. His sword cut through the air with incredible speed, the sound of it whistling sharply as it approached Sirone. But Sirone, despite the ferocity of the attack, stood motionless, almost as if he could sense what was coming before it even happened. It was clear to him that Ryan's swordsmanship was beyond anything he had faced before. The precision, the speed, the power, it was all there, displayed in full force. But what intrigued Sirone most was the sword's path. It was as if he could see the movement of Ryan's strikes before they even happened, an ability born of synesthesia. This gift allowed Sirone to anticipate the trajectory of the sword, predicting each cut with uncanny accuracy. But as the battle raged on, something began to change. Sirone could feel the pressure mounting, the intensity of Ryan's attacks beginning to overwhelm his ability to process them in time. Ryan's strikes grew heavier, faster, and more relentless, pushing Sirone to his limits. Despite the fear that gripped him, Sirone remained calm. He had trained for this moment, knowing that death was an inevitable part of the path he had chosen. Yet, he realized that fear of death was an illusion. Death had not yet come, it existed only in the future, a future that had not yet materialized. If he could learn to focus only on the present moment, then the threat of death would lose its power over him. His emotions were swallowed up by this realization. He was not afraid. His body moved with an almost mechanical precision, blocking each strike with perfect timing, absorbing the force of each blow as if it were nothing more than a fleeting gust of wind. Ryan, on the other hand, felt a surge of frustration. He couldn't understand how Shirone was able to face him with such composure, how he was able to withstand the full force of his attacks without flinching. Ryan's anger only fueled his resolve. He would not be outdone by this newcomer. He would push harder, strike faster, and overwhelm Shirone with sheer force. Ryan's next strike came like a tidal wave, heavy and brutal. The force of it landed squarely on Shirone's chest, drawing a deep gash across his skin. Shirone staggered back, blood seeping from the wound. For a moment, it seemed as though Ryan had broken through, but Shirone, panting heavily, refused to give up. The pain was nothing compared to the satisfaction of the knowledge that he had learned. He had come too far to falter now. As he stepped back to regroup, Shirone couldn't help but notice something strange. Ryan's attacks, though powerful, seemed to follow a predictable pattern. His movements, while quick and forceful, lacked the depth of understanding that Shirone had come to expect from a true master. Ryan's reliance on heavy, sweeping strikes made him predictable, easy to read. Shirone realized that Ryan's skill was based on brute strength rather than refined technique. It was a flaw that he could exploit. Shirone, understanding the subtle advantage he now held, decided to change his approach. He began to attack, his strikes fast and precise, landing one after another in rapid succession. Ryan, caught off guard, struggled to keep up with the relentless barrage. His strength began to fade, his stamina dwindling with each passing moment. Shirone's movements were calculated and efficient, each strike designed to wear Ryan down, to exhaust him physically and mentally. Ryan, breathing heavily, could feel his frustration mounting. He had never been in a battle like this before. His anger grew as the memory of his brother Rai resurfaced in his mind. He remembered how, in a single moment, Rai had shattered his sword and crushed his pride. Rai's smug smile, the way he had been showered with praise while Ryan lay in the dirt, broken and defeated, the memory stung with the force of 1,000 cuts. Determined to prove himself, Ryan screamed, his voice raw with emotion. He would not let Shirone defeat him. Not this time. He would become the greatest swordsman in the world. His resolve was as fierce as a storm, and in that moment, Ryan's attack grew even more desperate. His movements became erratic, unpredictable. Shirone could no longer read the sword's path. The fluidity of the battle had been replaced by chaos, and Ryan's strikes, now driven by emotion rather than reason, were impossible to predict. Shirone was thrown off balance, unable to anticipate the next move. The intensity of the battle reached its peak as Ryan, fueled by rage and determination, charged forward with all the force he could muster. His battle cry echoed through the night, a primal scream of defiance. But in that final moment, everything went silent. The sound of Ryan's final strike, a single, resounding thud, reverberated through the air, leaving both fighters frozen in place. The outcome of their brutal duel was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the battle had pushed both to their limits, testing not only their strength but their very will to survive. Shirone stood frozen, the sound of Ryan's battle cry still ringing in the air, but it was quickly followed by a sudden silence, broken only by the heavy breathing of the two combatants. In the midst of their fierce duel, Ryan's sword flew from his grip and embedded itself deeply into the ground far from where he stood. Both men, panting heavily, could hardly believe what had just transpired. Shirone, his sword still in hand, stood in disbelief, unable to process that he had actually managed to win. It had been a fight for survival, and despite the impossible odds, he had somehow come out on top. Ryan, once so full of confidence and pride, now stood with a stunned expression, his breath ragged as he tried to gather himself. He had not expected this outcome. For a moment, there was nothing but the intense stillness between them. Shirone, still feeling the adrenaline coursing through his veins, knew the victory had come at a cost. Ryan had been relentless, and Shirone had had to push himself further than he ever had before. His grip tightened on his sword, his body aching, but it was the unexpected humility in Ryan's voice that struck him. Ryan, the noble who had challenged him in the first place, admitted his defeat. There was no anger, no further challenge, just a strange acceptance of the loss. Yet, despite his surrender, Shirone could not shake the feeling that this moment was not the end, but merely the beginning of something more complicated. Ryan's pride had been wounded, and though he had said he accepted his defeat, Shirone couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. The reality of the situation began to set in as Shirone realized that, despite his victory, he had only survived the battle, not triumphed over it. Ryan, even in defeat, was not someone Shirone could easily dismiss. As a noble, his pride was everything, and Shirone knew that he had likely stepped on it in ways that could have far-reaching consequences. For Ryan, losing to someone like Shirone, who he had likely seen as a mere servant, must have been a humiliation he would struggle to overcome. But for Shirone, the entire duel had been a battle of survival, not honor. It had been a fight he had been forced into, a duel he had never wanted. And now, even as Ryan admitted his defeat, Shiren couldn't help but feel the weight of the noble's words. His gaze met Ryan's, and there was a moment of shared understanding, an unspoken realization that this was not just a physical battle, but a battle of pride, expectations, and perceptions. The exchange of words that followed was heated, as Shiren's frustration boiled over. He had never asked for this duel, yet here he was, standing victorious, but feeling a strange emptiness inside. He had been caught between a rock and a hard place, forced into a situation where he was expected to fight for his life, not for honor or glory. Ryan, on the other hand, had been fighting for something entirely different, a fight to prove his worth, to uphold his family's honor. The clash of their motivations only made the situation more complicated. Shiren's words, harsh and full of anger, struck deep, cutting into Ryan's sense of pride. But as they argued, something shifted in the air between them. Despite the tension, Shiren could sense that Ryan was not the arrogant noble he had once thought him to be. There was more to him than the bravado, more than the pride and ego that had initially driven him to challenge Shiren. It was a realization that took Shiren by surprise. But as the argument continued, Shiren felt his anger dissipate, replaced by a deep sense of exhaustion. The adrenaline of the fight had worn off, and the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. He had won, but at what cost? He collapsed to the ground, unable to hold back the overwhelming flood of emotions that had built up during the duel. The cold warrior he had been moments before was now gone, replaced by someone raw, vulnerable, and human. He had faced death, had danced on the edge of it, and it had shaken him in ways he had not anticipated. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to sob, to let the fear, the anger, and the confusion all escape. Ryan, watching from a distance, was taken aback. He had expected Shiren to be stoic, unemotional, but instead, he saw someone who had been deeply affected by the fight, someone who had been pushed to the brink of their limits. The image of the cold, unyielding warrior began to fade, replaced by the realization that Shiren was, in many ways, just like him, struggling, vulnerable, and human. Ryan couldn't understand what was happening. The same person who had fought him with such intensity, with such conviction, was now broken in front of him. The transformation was startling. He had expected to see a warrior's pride, perhaps a quiet acknowledgement of the duel's conclusion. But instead, he saw someone who had been deeply shaken by the experience. His mind struggled to reconcile the two versions of Shiren, the fierce fighter and the emotional wreck before him. It was then that Ryan realized something that surprised him. He had not been facing just a warrior in the duel. He had been facing someone who, like him, was trying to prove something. Shiren had been fighting for his survival, for his place in the world, not for honor or glory. In a way, they were more alike than Ryan had initially thought. Eventually, the tension in the air subsided, and the two found themselves standing in an unexpected camaraderie. Ryan, with his unflagging optimism and infectious personality, extended a hand to Shiren, offering not just a gesture of peace but a genuine desire for friendship. Shiren, though hesitant at first, found himself accepting it. They were two people who had been forced into a confrontation, but now they found something more in each other, a connection, a shared experience that went beyond their differences. Shiren had learned not just about swordsmanship, but about the complexities of human nature, and Ryan had learned the importance of discipline and humility. In that moment, they were no longer adversaries, but allies bound by mutual respect. Over the course of the next year, their bond grew. Shiren settled into his work at the Great Ogent Library, where he had been tasked with the daunting responsibility of cataloging thousands of books. The work was grueling, but Shiren's efficiency had improved, and the once overwhelming task of organizing the books had become more manageable. With only a few hundred books left to read out of his ambitious goal of 850, Shiren was closer than ever to achieving his dream of mastering the vast knowledge contained within the library's walls. He had also grown stronger in his swordsmanship, having faced Ryan's intense challenge, and he had begun to understand the essence of fear and how to conquer it. The duel had been a turning point in his life, one that had forged a new strength in him, both mentally and physically. Ryan, on the other hand, had become a regular presence in the library, though not always as focused as Shiren. He would often wander through the shelves, unable to sit still for long periods of time. His energy was boundless, and though Shiren sometimes found it frustrating, he couldn't help but appreciate the way Ryan brought a spark of life into the otherwise quiet and solemn environment of the library. Ryan's presence was like a constant reminder to Shiren that life, though often serious and filled with hardships, could still be filled with joy and laughter. The contrast between their personalities, Shiren's focused determination and Ryan's carefree enthusiasm, created an unlikely but powerful friendship. The bond between them had strengthened over the year, and Shiren found himself more at ease with Ryan's playful antics, even when they frustrated him. Ryan had a way of lightening the mood, of making Shiren see the humor in situations that might otherwise have been grueling or monotonous. It wasn't just about the work anymore, it was about the shared experiences, the moments of camaraderie that made everything else seem more manageable. Ryan, though sometimes impulsive and reckless, had a genuine heart, and Shiren had come to see him as more than just a nobleman or a reckless young master. He had become a true friend, someone Shiren could rely on in ways he hadn't thought possible. Together, they had learned from each other, grown together, and faced challenges together. It was a friendship that neither of them had anticipated, but one that had become an integral part of both of their lives. Their journey, though far from over, had already been transformative for both of them. Shiren had learned the value of friendship, the importance of perseverance, and the power of vulnerability. Ryan had learned discipline, humility, and the true meaning of strength. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with, not just because of their individual talents, but because of the bond they had forged through their shared experiences. Their friendship was something neither of them could have predicted, but it was one that would carry them through whatever challenges lay ahead. 10 minutes after their earlier conversation, Ryan and Shiren sat across from each other at a large, wooden table in the library. The quiet of the room, filled with rows of towering bookshelves, was only interrupted by the rustling of pages and the occasional shift of books. Ryan's eyes wandered as he observed Shiren, who was fully absorbed in his studies. Shiren had always been dedicated to his goal of becoming a magician, a pursuit that had driven him to read extensively, sometimes with little rest. Despite his humble beginnings, he had already read 600 history books, a truly extraordinary feat for someone his age. Ryan, on the other hand, found it hard to understand the drive behind such an overwhelming goal. He couldn't fathom the need to read so many books, let alone the 800 Shiren had set out to read. Ryan's own approach to learning was more carefree, more about the immediate thrill of the moment rather than a methodical long-term plan. To him, the idea of poring over thousands of pages of dense text seemed absurd, even a little torturous. But as Shiren continued his studies, Ryan couldn't help but feel a twinge of admiration. He marveled at Shiren's incredible ability to retain knowledge, absorbing it almost effortlessly while his own focus seemed fleeting by comparison. Shiren, ever the perfectionist, explained that he was behind in his studies, having had little opportunity to focus on his education before coming to the Ogent family. He mentioned how now that he had managed to get through 600 history books, he was beginning to understand the fundamentals. He was closer to his goal than ever before. Ryan, who had always lived in the shadow of his older brother Rai, often found himself questioning the purpose of such extreme dedication to reading. "Isn't 800 books too many?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Despite his questions, Shiren's unwavering commitment to his studies left Ryan with no choice but to respect the effort, even if he didn't fully understand it. Ryan, searching for something to distract himself from the seriousness of their conversation, decided to pick up a book from the table. He flipped it open and began reading aloud from the preface, quoting a question that many had asked before: if a swordsman and a magician fought, who would win? The book's introduction spoke of a grand adventure in search of the answer, from the glistening peaks of Ardusna Mountain to the strange, carnivorous trees that devoured birds. But Ryan, clearly unimpressed, quickly shut the book, calling it boring. Shiren, however, seemed genuinely interested in what was written, arguing that the book was fun and engaging. Ryan, who was more accustomed to reading stories filled with action and excitement, couldn't understand how Shiren could enjoy a book with no pictures and no sword fights. The lack of visual stimulation and the absence of topics he cared about made the book almost unbearable to him. He accused Shiren of overestimating the book's appeal, but Shiren, ever the advocate for knowledge, defended it passionately, insisting that it was indeed enjoyable. As Shiren asked Ryan what the author's conclusion was, Ryan, not even having read more than a few sentences, jokingly speculated that the swordsman would win. He laughed at the idea of a magician being able to defeat someone with a sword. Shiren, unimpressed by Ryan's lack of effort, pressed further, asking him to read the entire book before offering such an opinion. As the two bantered, the sound of footsteps approaching interrupted their conversation. Ryan's older brother, entered the library with an air of authority that immediately commanded attention. Ryan, who had always looked up to his older brother despite their differences, greeted him with playful enthusiasm, asking his opinion on the question at hand. Rai, with his usual calm and detached demeanor, didn't engage with Ryan's teasing. Instead, he turned to Shiren, as if sensing the other boy's deep curiosity. The question had turned from a lighthearted debate into a more serious discussion about the potential outcome of a fight between a swordsman and a magician. Rai, who had always been the more logical of the two, didn't waste time with idle speculation. He explained that the answer was quite simple. Based on the standing of swordsmen and magicians across the continent, it was clear that the swordsman would always have the upper hand. He didn't even consider the idea that a magician might win, pointing out that, while both were formidable in their own right, the swordsman had the advantage. Ryan, still intrigued by the concept, teased his brother, questioning whether his preference for swordsmen was because he himself was a swordsman. Rai, unamused by Ryan's antics, shot him a cold look, dismissing the playful challenge without a second thought. Rai's focus shifted entirely to Sirone, as he asked the younger boy for his own opinion. Sirone, caught off guard by Rai's serious tone, hesitated for a moment before responding. He considered the question carefully, weighing the advantages of both a swordsman and a magician. Sirone believed that if both were of equal strength, the magician would likely have the upper hand once they entered their spirit zone, a space where they could cast powerful spells undisturbed. However, Sirone also understood the importance of the swordsman's physical prowess, and he speculated that if the swordsman could close the distance quickly enough before the magician could cast their spells, they might still win. He was cut off before he could finish, though, as Rai immediately contradicted him, asserting that the swordsman would always win. The certainty in Rai's words left Sirone feeling unsure of how to respond. He was used to Rai's confidence, but this was different. Rai's dismissal of his theory was not only abrupt but also final, as if Sirone's opinion held no weight in the face of the older brother's experience. Ryan, observing the exchange, began to understand the subtle dynamic between the two brothers. Rai had always been one to belittle those who seemed to challenge his ideas, especially when it came to things that were important to him. Since they were young, if Rai had found something unpleasant or someone who opposed him, he would take great pleasure in crushing it, all in the name of asserting his dominance. Rai, in his usual fashion, mocked Sirone's interest in history, suggesting that he had heard of the armor set of the Five Gods, a legendary artifact that disrupted a magician's spirit zone. Rai spoke of anti-magic, an ability so powerful that it could nullify a magician's magic entirely. As Rai's words sank in, Sirone felt a chill run down his spine. The term anti-magic was not one he had ever fully understood before, but now, as it hung in the air, it seemed to shatter the very foundation of his previous assumptions. He had heard of anti-magic artifacts before, but never in such a context. Rai's casual mention of them made Sirone realize just how much more there was to the battle between swordsmen and magicians than he had ever considered. As Sirone stood there, silent and deep in thought, his mind raced to catch up with the weight of Rai's revelation. The notion of anti-magic was far more complex than anything Sirone had encountered in his studies. His entire understanding of how a fight between a swordsman and magician might unfold had just been turned upside down. The concept of anti-magic made everything that Sirone had believed seem insignificant, rendering his previous theories almost laughable. He had only begun to understand the power that such artifacts could wield, and the implications of their existence were far-reaching. His thoughts, tangled and confused, struggled to make sense of it all as he stood frozen in place, grappling with the realization that his journey to become a magician would be much more complicated and dangerous than he had ever imagined. Sirone's encounter with Rai had left him deep in thought. Rai had mocked him, bringing up the armor set of the Five Gods, a legendary artifact imbued with the power of anti-magic. This artifact was said to be capable of disrupting a mage's spirit zone, which was an inherent ability that all mages possessed. The spirit zone allowed a mage to fight with enhanced power, as if they were sharks in the deep waters of their domain, making them formidable opponents in battle. However, Rai explained that there was a way to disturb this zone, to rob a mage of their most critical advantage. That method was anti-magic, an ability to nullify magic by preventing the spirit zone from coming into play. Sirone stood still, his mind racing at the implications of such an artifact. If anti-magic could truly negate the spirit zone, then it would make mages vulnerable and defenseless. The idea of wielding such power over magic left Sirone speechless. Despite the theory behind the artifact, Sirone knew that in practice, anti-magic was still largely a concept, one that had been created using mana from the heart of a dragon. Rai elaborated on the limitations of the artifact. The effectiveness of anti-magic was not absolute. Even the greatest practitioner, Yakra, could only exhibit 65% of the potential power that the armor set of the Five Gods could bring. The rest of its power remained dormant, a reminder that, even with vast resources and knowledge, some things could not be fully realized. Rai continued to drive home the point that such an artifact came with a price tag that was astronomical. The cost of even one piece of the armor was equivalent to an entire kingdom's yearly budget. Yet, despite the high price, Rai claimed that it wasn't always necessary to rely on these artifacts. Mages, it seemed, had a hand in the creation and sale of anti-magic. They had realized that there was a market for such a potent tool, and began to sell their knowledge of it to the highest bidder. Rai's cynical view of mages painted them as opportunistic, willing to sell out their own kind to make a profit. His harsh words left Shiren unsettled, but he stood firm in his belief that anti-magic was not inherently evil. It had been created by mages for the greater good, to prevent magic from spiraling out of control, and to provide a means of training in environments where magic was prohibited.